Natural society unites beings in time and space. It fixes affection on those creatures on which we depend and to which our action must be adapted. Natural society begins at home and radiates over the world as more and more things become tributary to our personal being. In marriage and the family, in industry, government, and war, attention is riveted on temporal existences, on the fortunes of particular bodies, natural or corporate. There is then a primacy of nature over spirit in social life, and this primacy, in a certain sense, endures to the end, since all spirit must be the spirit of something, and reason could not exist or be conceived at all unless a material organism, personal or social, lay beneath to give thought an occasion and a point of view, and to give preference a direction. Things cannot be near or far, worse or better, unless a definite life were taken as a standard, a life lodged somewhere in space and time. Reason is a principle of order appearing in a subject matter, which, in its subsistence and quantity, must be an irrational datum. Reason expresses purpose, purpose expresses impulse, and impulse expresses a natural body with self-equilibrating powers. At the same time, natural growths may be called achievements only because, when formed, they support a joyful and liberal experience. Nature's works first acquire a meaning in the commentaries they provoke. Material processes have interesting climaxes only from the point of view of the life that expresses them, in which their ebb and flow grows impassioned and vehement. Nature's values are imputed to her retroactively by spirit, which in its material dependence has a logical and moral primacy of its own. In themselves, events are perfectly automatic, steady, and fluid, not stopping where we see a goal, nor avoiding what we call failures. And so they would always have remained in crude experience, if no cumulative reflection, no art, and no science had come to dominate and foreshorten that equable flow of substance, arresting it ideally in behalf of some rational interest. Thus it comes to pass that rational interests have a certain ascendancy in the world, as well as an absolute authority over it, for they arise where an organic equilibrium has naturally established itself. Such an equilibrium maintains itself by virtue of the same necessity that produced it, without arresting the flux or introducing any miracle. It sustains in being an ideal form. This form is what consciousness corresponds to and raises to felt existence, so that significant thoughts are something which nature necessarily lingers upon and seems to serve. The being to whom they come is the most widely based and synthetic of her creatures. The mind spreads and soars in proportion as the body feeds on the surrounding world. Noble ideas, although rare and difficult to attain, are not naturally fugitive. Consciousness is not ideal merely in its highest phases. It is ideal through and through, at one level as much as, at another, it celebrates an attained balance in nature, or grieves at its collapse. It prophesies and remembers. It loves and dreams. It sees even nature from the point of view of ideal interests, and measures the flux of things by ideal standards. It registers its own movement, like that of its objects, entirely in ideal terms, looking to fix goals of its own imagining, and using nothing in the operation but concretions and discourse. Primary mathematical notions, for instance, are evidences of a successful reactive method attained in the organism and translated in consciousness into a stable grammar which has a wide applicability and great persistence, so that it has come to be elaborated ideally into prodigious abstract systems of thought. Every experience of victory, eloquence, or beauty is a momentary success of the same kind, and if repeated and sustained, becomes a spiritual possession. Society also breeds its ideal harmonies. At first, it establishes affections between beings naturally conjoined in the world. Later, it grows sensitive to free and spiritual affinities, to oneness of mind and sympathetic purposes. These ideal affinities, although grounded like the others on material relations, for sympathy presupposes communication, do not have those relations for their theme, but rest on them merely as a pedestal from which they look away to their own realm, as music, while sustained by vibrating instruments, looks away from them to its own universe of sound. Ideal society is a drama enacted in the imagination. Its personages are mythical, beginning with that brave protagonist who calls himself I and speaks all the soliloquies. When most nearly material, these personages are human souls, the life of particular bodies, or floating moral reputations, echoes of those lives in one another. From this source, in their bodies, they evoke notions of country, posterity, humanity, and the gods. These figures all represent some circle of events or forces in the real world. But such representation, besides being mythical, is usually most inadequate. The boundaries of that province, which each spirit presides over, are vaguely drawn, the spirit itself being correspondingly indefinite. This ambiguity is conspicuous, perhaps, in the most absorbing of the personages which a man constructs in this imaginative fashion, his idea of himself. There is society where none intrudes, and for most men, sympathy with their imaginary selves is a powerful and dominant emotion. True memory offers but a meager and interrupted vista of past experience. Yet even that picture is far too rich a term for mental discourse to bandy about. A name with few physical and social connotations is what must represent the man to his own thinkings, or rather, it is no memory, however eviscerated, that fulfills that office. A man's notion of himself is a concretion in discourse, for which his more constant somatic feelings, his ruling interests, and his social relations furnish most of the substance. The more reflective and self-conscious a man is, the more completely will his experience be subsumed and absorbed in his perennial I. Philosophy has come to reinforce this reflective egotism. He may even regard all nature as nothing but his half-voluntary dream, and encourage himself thereby to give even to the physical world a dramatic and sentimental color. But the more successful he is in stuffing everything into his self-consciousness, the more desolate will the void become which surrounds him. For self is, after all, but one term in a primitive dichotomy, and would lose its specific and intimate character were it no longer contrasted with anything else. The egotist must therefore people the desert he has spread about him, and he naturally peoples it with mythical counterparts of himself. Sometimes, if his imagination is sensuous, his alter egos are incarnate in the landscape, and he creates a poetic mythology. Sometimes, when the inner life predominates, they are projected into his own forgotten past or infinite future. He will then say that all experience is really his own, and that some inexplicable illusion has momentarily raised opaque partitions in his omniscient mind. Philosophers less pretentious and more worldly than these have sometimes felt, in their way, the absorbing force of subconsciousness. La Rochefoucauld could describe amour propre as the spring of all human sentiments, involves preoccupations not merely with the idea of self, but with the idea reproduced in men's minds. This soliloquy has become a dialogue, or rather a solo with an echoing chorus. Interest in one's own social figure is to some extent a material interest. For other men's love or aversion is the principle read into their acts, and a social animal, like man, is dependent on other men's acts for its happiness. An individual's concern for the attitude society takes toward him is therefore, in the first instance, concern for his own welfare. But imagination here refines upon worldly interest. What others think of us would be of little moment did it not, when known, so deeply tinge what we think of ourselves. Nothing could better prove the mythical character of self-consciousness than this extreme sensitiveness to alien opinions. For if a man really knew himself, he would utterly despise the ignorant notions others might form on a subject in which he had such matchless opportunities for observation. Indeed, those opinions would hardly seem to him directed upon the reality at all, and he would laugh at them as he might at the stock fortune-telling of some itinerant gypsy. As it is, however, the least breath of irresponsible and anonymous censure lashes our self-esteem and sometimes quite transforms our plans and affections. The passions grafted on wounded pride are the most inveterate. They are green and vigorous in old age. We crave support in vanity as we do in religion, and never forgive contradictions in that sphere. For however persistent and passionate such prejudices may be, we know too well that they are woven of thin air. A hostile word, by starting a contrary imaginative current, buffets them rudely and threatens to dissolve their being. The highest form of vanity is love of fame. It is a passion easy to deride, but hard to understand, and in men who live at all by imagination, almost impossible to eradicate. The good opinion of posterity can have no possible effect on our fortunes, and the practical value which reputation may temporarily have is quite absent in posthumous fame. The direct object of this passion, that a name should survive in men's mouths to which no adequate idea of its original can be attached, seems a thin and fantastic satisfaction, especially when we consider how little we should probably sympathize with the creatures that are to remember us. What comfort would it be to Virgil that boys still read him at school, or to Pindar that he is sometimes mentioned in a world from which everything he loved has departed? Yet, beneath this desire for nominal longevity, apparently so inane, there may lurk an ideal ambition of which the ancients cannot have been unconscious when they set so high a value on fame. They often identified fame with immortality, a subject on which they had far more rational sentiments than have since prevailed. Fame, as a noble mind conceives and desires it, is not embodied in a monument, a biography, or the reputation of a strange name by strangers. It consists in the immortality of a man's work, his spirit, his efficacy, and the perpetual rejuvenation of his soul in the world. When Horace, no model of magnanimity, wrote his Exegi Monumentum, he was not thinking that the pleasure he would continue to give would remind people of his trivial personality, which indeed he never particularly celebrated, and which had much better lie buried with his bones. He was thinking, of course, of that pleasure itself, thinking that the delight, half lyric, half sarcastic, which those delicate cameos had given him to carve, would be perennially renewed in all who retrace them. Nay, perhaps we may not go too far in saying that even that impersonal satisfaction was not the deepest he felt. The deepest, very likely, flowed from the immortality, not of his monument, but of the subject and passion it commemorated. That tenderness, I mean, and that disillusion with mortal life which rendered his verse immortal. He had expressed, and in expressing, appropriated some recurring human moods, some mocking renunciations, and he knew that his spirit was immortal, being linked and identified with that portion of the truth. He had become a little spokesman of humanity, uttering what all experience repeats, more or less articulately, and even if he should cease to be honored in men's memories, he would continue to be unwittingly honored and justified in their lives. What we may conceive to have come in this way, even within a Horace's apprehension, is undoubtedly what has attached many nobler souls to fame, with an inversion of moral derivations which all mythical expression involves. We speak of fame as the reward of genius, whereas in truth, genius, the imaginative dominion of experience, is its own reward, and fame is but a foolish image by which its worth is symbolized. When the Virgin in the Magnificat says, "Behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed," the psalmist surely means to express a spiritual exaltation exempt from vanity. He merely translates into a rhetorical figure the fact that what had been first revealed to Mary would also bless all generations, that the Church should in consequence deem and pronounce her blessed, is an incident describing, but not creating, the unanimity in their religious joys. Fame is thus the outward sign or recognition of an inward representative authority residing in genius or good fortune, an authority in which lies the whole worth of fame. Those will substantially remember and honor us who keep our ideals, and we shall live on in those ages whose experience we have anticipated. Free society differs from that which is natural and legal precisely in this, that it does not cultivate relations which in the last analysis are experienced and material, but turns exclusively to unanimities in meanings, to collaborations in an ideal world. The basis of free society is of course natural, as we said, but free society has ideal goals spirits cannot touch save by becoming unanimous. At the same time, public opinion, reputation, and impersonal sympathy reinforce only very general feelings, and reinforce them vaguely. And as the interplay of sentiment becomes precise, it craves more specific points of support or comparison. It is in creatures of our own species that we chiefly scent the aroma of inward sympathy, because it is they that are visibly moved on the same occasions as ourselves, and it is to those among our fellow men who share our special haunts and habits that we feel more precise affinities, though the ground for such feeling is animal contact and contagion. Its deliverance does not revert to those natural accidents, but concerns represented sympathy and represented souls. Friendship, springing from accidental association, terminates in a consciousness of ideal and essential agreement. Comradeship is a form of friendship still akin to general sociability and gregariousness. When men are in the same boat together, when a common anxiety, occupation, or sport unites them, they feel their human kinship in an intensified form, without any greater personal affinity subsisting between them. The same effect is produced by a common estrangement from the rest of society. For this reason, comradeship lasts no longer than the circumstances that bring it about. Its constancy is proportionate to the monotony of people's lives and minds. There is a lasting bond among schoolfellows, because No one can become a boy again and have a new set of playmates. There is a persistent comradeship with one's countrymen, especially abroad, because seldom is a man pliable and polyglot enough to be at home among foreigners or really to understand them. There is an inevitable comradeship with men of the same breeding or profession, however bad these may be, because habits soon monopolize the man. Nevertheless, a greater buoyancy, a longer youth, a richer experience would break down all these limits of fellowship. Such clingings to the familiar are 3 parts dread of the unfamiliar and want of resource in its presence, for 1 part in them of genuine loyalty. Plasticity loves new molds because it can fill them, but for a man of sluggish mind and bad manners, there is decidedly no place like home. Though comradeship is an accidental bond, it is the condition of ideal friendship. For the ideal, in all spheres, is nothing but the accidental confirming itself and generating its own standard. Men must meet to love, and many other accidents besides conjunction must conspire to make a true friendship possible. In order that friendship may fulfill the conditions even of comradeship, it is requisite that the friends have the same social status, so that they may live at ease together and have congenial tastes. They must further have enough community of occupation and gifts to give each an appreciation of the other's faculty, for qualities are not complementary unless they are qualities of the same substance. Nothing must be actual in either friend that is not potential in the other. For this reason, among friends, friends are generally of the same sex, for when men and women agree, it is only in their conclusions. Their reasons are always different, so that, while intellectual harmony between men and women is easily possible, its delightful and magic quality lies precisely in the fact that it does not rise from mutual understanding, but is a conspiracy of alien essences, and a kissing, as it were, in the dark. As man's body differs from woman's in sex and strength, so his mind differs from hers in quality and function. They can cooperate, but can never fuse. The human race and its intellectual life is organized like the bees. The masculine soul is a worker, sexually atrophied, and essentially dedicated to impersonal and universal arts. The feminine is a queen, infinitely fertile, omnipresent in its brooding industry, but passive and abounding in intuitions without method and passions without justice. Friendship with a woman is therefore apt to be more or less than friendship. Less, because there is no intellectual parity. More, because, even when the relation remains wholly dispassionate, as in respect to old ladies, there is something mysterious and oracular about a woman's mind which inspires a certain instinctive deference and puts it out of the question to judge what she says by masculine standards. She has a kind of sibylline intuition and the right to be irrationally apropos. There is a gallantry of the mind which pervades all conversation with the lady, as there is a natural courtesy toward children and mystics. But such a habit of respectful concession, marking as it does an intellectual alienation as profound as that which separates us from the dumb animals, is radically incompatible with friendship. Friends, moreover, should have been young together. Much difference in age defeats equality and forbids frankness on many a fundamental subject. It confronts 2 minds of unlike focus, one nearsighted and without perspective, the other seeing only the background of present things. While comparisons in these respects may be interesting and borrowing sometimes possible, lending the older mind life and the younger mind wisdom, such intercourse has hardly the value of spontaneous sympathy, in which the spark of mutual intelligence flies, as it should, almost without words. Contagion is the only source of valid mind reading you must imitate to understand, and where the plasticity of two minds is not similar, their mutual interpretations are necessarily false. They idealize in their friends whatever they do not invent or ignore, and the friendship which should have lived on energies conspiring spontaneously together dies into conscious appreciation. All these are merely permissive conditions for friendship. Its positive essence is yet to find. How, we may ask, does the vision of the general socius humanity become specific in the vision of a particular friend without losing its ideality or reverting to practical values? Of course, individuals might be singled out for the special benefits they may have conferred, but a friend's only gift is himself, and friendship is not friendship. It is a form of free or liberal society. If it does not terminate in an ideal possession, in an object loved for its own sake, such objects can be ideas only, not forces, for forces are subterranean and instrumental things, having only such value as they borrow from their ulterior effects and manifestations. To praise the utility of friendship, as the ancients so often did, and to regard it as a political institution justified, like victory or government, by its material results, is to lose one's moral bearings. The value of victory or good government is rather to be found in the fact that, among other things, it might render friendship possible. We are not to look now for what makes friendship useful, but for whatever may be found in friendship that may lend utility to life. The first note that gives sociability a personal quality and raises the comrade into an incipient friend is doubtless sensuous affinity. Whatever reaction we may eventually make on an impression, after it has had time to soak in and to merge in some practical or intellectual habit, its first assault is always on the senses, and no sense is an indifferent organ. Each has, so to speak, its congenial rate of vibration, and gives its stimuli a varying welcome. Little as we may attend to these instinctive hospitalities of sense, they betray themselves in the je ne sais quoi that makes instinctive sympathy. Voice, manner, aspect, hints of congenial taste and judgment, a jest in the right key, a gesture marking the right aversions, all these trifles leave behind a pervasive impression. We reject a vision we find indigestible and without congruity to our inner dream. We accept and incorporate another into our private pantheon, where it becomes a legitimate figure, however dumb and subsidiary it may remain. In a refined nature, these sensuous premonitions of sympathy are seldom misleading. Liking cannot, of course, grow into friendship overnight, as it might into love. A pleasing impression, even if retained, will lie perfectly passive and harmless in the mind, until new and different impressions follow to deepen the interest at first evoked, and to remove its center of gravity altogether from the senses. In love, if the field is clear, a single glimpse may, like Tristan's potion, produce a violent and irresistible passion. But in friendship, the result remains more proportionate to the incidental causes. Discrimination is preserved, jealousy and exclusiveness are avoided. That vigilant, besetting, insatiable affection, so full of doubts and torments, with which the lover follows his object is out of place here, for the friend has no property in his friend's body, or leisure, or residual ties. He accepts what is offered and what is acceptable, and the rest he leaves in peace. He is distinctly not his brother's keeper, for the society of friends is free. Friendship may indeed come to exist without sensuous liking or comradeship to pave the way, but unless intellectual sympathy and moral appreciation are powerful enough to react on a natural instinct and to produce in the end the personal affection which at first was wanting, friendship does not arise. Recognition given to a man's talent or virtue is not properly friendship. Friends must desire to live as much as possible together and to share their work, thoughts, and pleasures. Good friendship and sensuous affinity are indispensable to give spiritual communion a personal accent. Otherwise, men would be indifferent vehicles for such thoughts and powers as emanated from them, and attention would not be in any way arrested or refracted by the human medium through which it beheld the good. No natural vehicle, however, is indifferent. No natural organ is or should be transparent. Transparency is a virtue only in artificial instruments, organs in which no blood flows and whose intrinsic operation is not itself a portion of human life. In looking through a field glass, I do not wish to perceive the lenses, nor to see rainbows about their rim. Yet I should not wish the eye itself to lose its pigments, and add no dyes to the bulks it discerns. The sense for color is a vital endowment and an ingredient in human happiness, but no vitality is added by the intervention of further media, which are not themselves living organs. A man is sometimes colored and sometimes a clear medium for the energies he exerts. When a thought conveyed or a work done enters alone into the observer's experience, no friendship is possible. This is always the case when the master is dead, for if his reconstructed personality retains any charm, it is only as an explanation or conceived nexus for the work he performed. In a philosopher or artist, too, personality is merely instrumental, for, although in a sense pervasive, a creative personality evaporates into its expression, and whatever part of it may not have been translated into ideas is completely negligible from the public point of view. What portion of a man's soul which he has not alienated and objectified is open only to those who know him otherwise than by his works, and do not estimate him by his public attributions. Such persons are his friends. Into their lives he has entered not merely through an idea with which his name may be associated, nor through the fame of some feat he may have performed, but by awakening an inexpressible animal sympathy, by the contagion of emotions felt before the same objects. Estimation has been partly arrested at its medium, and personal relations have added their homely accent to universal discourse. Friendship might thus be called ideal sympathy refracted by a human medium, or comradeship and sensuous affinity coloring a spiritual light. The tie that, in contemporary society, most nearly resembles the ancient ideal of friendship is a well-assorted marriage. In spite of intellectual disparity and of divergence in occupation, man and wife are bound together by a common dwelling, common friends, common affection for children, and, what is of great importance, common financial interest. These bonds often suffice for substantial and lasting unanimity, even when no ideal passion preceded, so that what is called the marriage of reason, if it is truly reasonable, may give a fair promise of happiness, since a normal married life can produce the sympathies it requires. When the common ideal interests needed to give friendship a noble strain, become altogether predominant, so that comradeship and personal liking may be dispensed with. Friendship passes into more and more political fellowships. Discipleship is a union of this kind, without claiming any share in the Master's private life, perhaps without having ever seen him. We may enjoy communion with his mind and feel his support and guidance in following the ideal which links us together. Hero worship is an imaginative passion in which latent ideals assume picturesque shapes and take actual persons for their symbols. Such companionship, perhaps wholly imaginary, is a very clear and simple example of ideal society. The unconscious hero, to be sure, happens to exist, but his existence is irrelevant to his function, provided only he be present to the idealizing mind. There is, or need be, no comradeship, no actual force or influence transmitted from him. Certain capacities and tendencies in the worshipper are brought to a focus by the hero's image, who is thereby first discovered and deputed to be a hero. He is the unmoved mover, like Aristotle's God, and like every ideal to which thought or action is directed. The symbol, however, is ambiguous in hero worship, being in one sense ideal, the representation of an inner demand, and in another sense, a sensible experience, the representative of an external reality. Accordingly, the symbol, when highly prized and long contemplated, may easily become an idol. That in it which is not ideal nor representative of the worshipper's demand may be imported confusedly into the total adored, and may thus receive a senseless worship. The devotion, which was, in its origin, an ideal tendency grown conscious and expressed in fancy, may thus become a mechanical force, vitiating the ideal. For this reason, it is very important that the first objects to fix the soul's admiration should be really admirable, for otherwise their accidental blemishes will corrupt the mind to which they appear subspecie boni. Discipleship and hero worship are not stable relations, since the meaning they embody is ideal and radiates from within outward, and since the image to which that meaning is attributed is controlled by a real external object, meaning and image, as time goes on, will necessarily fall apart. The idol will be discredited, an ideal, ideally conceived and known to be an ideal, a spirit worshipped in spirit and in truth, will take the place of the pleasing phenomenon, and in regard to every actual being, however noble, discipleship will yield to emulation, and worship to an admiration more or less selective and critical. The disembodied ideal, however, is unmanageable and vague. It cannot exercise the natural and material suasion proper to a model we are expected to imitate. The more fruitful procedure is accordingly to idealize some historical figure or natural force, to ignore or minimize in it what does not seem acceptable, and to retain at the same time all the unobjectable personal color and all the graphic traits that can help to give that model a persuasive vitality. This poetic process is all the more successful for being automatic. It is in this way that heroes and gods have been created. A legend or fable lying in the mind and continually repeated, gained insensibly at each recurrence some new eloquence, some fresh congruity with the emotion it had already awakened, and was destined to awake again. To measure the importance of this truth, the reader need only conceive the distance traversed from the Achilles that may have existed to the hero in Homer, or from Jesus as he might have been in real life, or even as he is in the Gospels, to Christ in the Church.